If you've got $1,200 to spend on a brand new gaming PC build, I genuinely believe that now is a better time than ever to assemble an awesome system for 1080p and 1440p gaming. Even against the backdrop of new Ryzen 9000 CPUs, it doesn't get much better than this. I'll be walking you guys through all the parts that make this build possible, how to assemble it from start right through to finish, and looking at performance later in all the latest AAA and FPS titles. Let's do this. Take your build to the next level with Apacer's sleek RGB DDR5 memory. Available with a wide range of speeds and capacities, the Apacer Panther lineup has a kit for everyone. A great looking aluminium alloy heatsink offers excellent heat dissipation, while Intel XMP 3.0 and AMD Expo certification means this RAM is a great fit for Team Red and Team Blue systems. Plus, RGB support in Asus, GeekaWhat, MSI and ASRock software suites makes this an easy addition to any build. Learn more at the first link in the description below. I am going to run you guys through how to assemble this build, all the parts in it, but first let's take a look at the CPU and GPU combo. Now these are undoubtedly the two most important parts in any build when it comes to gaming performance. Get these right and your build is going to perform well, get them wrong and you've got some problems ahead. Now the RX 7800 XT is one of the best value, most compelling GPUs on the market right now. When you look at the current GPU landscape, for a $500 price tag, there really isn't a lot to choose from. The 4070 non-super is simply a bit too expensive, and while features like ray tracing and better DLSS are nice to have, the 7800 XT has purely more power and quite a bit more video memory. The only other alternatives to this card are AMD's 7900 GRE, a card I like, but it doesn't give you any more VRAM and costs more money, and the 7700 XT, which is cheaper but provides significantly less performance and less memory. The 7800 XT is like the ideal 1440p card. Whether you're looking to play Call of Duty's Warzone, Modern Warfare 3, or step things up to AAA titles like Cyberpunk, the 7800 XT ticks a lot of boxes. AMD's GPUs are more price competitive, I think, than they've ever been, and I'm not just talking about RX 7000 series, but even previous generations too. This particular one from PowerColor is their Hellhound card, and it's one of the slightly higher end designs. You can save money, it really doesn't make that much of a difference, but I like how this looks, and it's performed well in all our reviews and testing here on the GeekaWhat channel. It's got a really nice triple fan cooler, there's some nice black and red accents which kind of ties in with our AMD theme today, metal backplate on the rear as well, which is great, and even this nice little light bar at the top, which I think looks absolutely fantastic. The main thing though that matters is the gaming performance, which I'll look at in more detail a little bit later. Now the CPU I'm going to pair this graphics card up with is none other than AMD's Ryzen 5 7600. Now in my opinion, this is a CPU for the ages, and what I mean by that is I think it's one of the most compelling gaming CPUs we've ever seen, especially for those of us looking to build a decent gaming PC without spending a fortune. Now it's got 6 cores, 12 threads, decent single-threaded performance via relatively fast clock speed, and unlike Intel's current 14th gen offering, it's more affordable and hasn't faced really any controversies, stability problems, voltage issues, but the 7600 is boring and reliable in all of the right ways. It's also not going to be a bottleneck, especially when it comes to 1440p gaming. As you notch up the resolutions, you become more GPU than CPU bound, and even at 1080p, your CPU bottleneck should be fairly minimal. Now, one thing I love about Ryzen CPUs, and again, this is another advantage compared to the current Intel offering, is motherboards. And this motherboard is a great example. It's the MSI B650 Gaming Plus Wi-Fi. Unlike on Intel, you can overclock on the mid-tier chipset to the B650 boards, and PCI Generation 5 support, at least for SSDs, is more widespread on AMD. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a more budget-oriented B650 design, and that does come with some compromises, and I'll talk you through what those compromises look like. The first of these becomes fairly evident when you look at the rear I/O. There's no integrated I/O shield, which is again a cost-saving measure. The audio ports are a little bit more basic, there's no optical, and your high-speed USB ports are more limited. Just one Type-C connection on this board on the rear panel, though we do gain one on the front panel too, so not all is lost. The CPU power delivery is also weaker, you can see this here via a lack of cooling. That's going to inhibit overclocking support. Not that you're really going to be doing a great deal of it anyway. And nice quality of life features like extra M.2 heat shields, toolless NVMe slots are gone. The motherboard's more bare. There's a lot less circuitry, there's less connections, there's less things the board does. But what it does do well is supports all of course, our Ryzen 7000 and upcoming 9000 CPUs with a BIOS update and gives us DDR5 memory support. For me, that's kind of all we need. And the inclusion of Wi-Fi, while not the top end standard, is good good enough for the build today. The only other thing really to note, which is a little bit disappointing, is a lack of a Gen 5 NVMe slot. You won't find Gen 5 PCIe unless you get the more expensive B650E chipset, but it would have been nice to see MSI push the boat out just a little bit more when it comes to the NVMe connectivity on this board. Now, that's enough about the motherboard. It's now time to go ahead and install the CPU. First things first, you need to locate the triangle on the CPU socket. That's up here in the top left. Then grab your CPU and flip it round to the rear. And on the rear, you'll find again another golden triangle. That's just up here in this top corner. With the triangle on the socket and the CPU located, you're going to push the arm down and lift the socket cover upwards. Line the triangles up, carefully and gently drop the CPU into place. Now you can give it a little bit of a wiggle side to side, but you only really want to feel a tiny bit of movement before returning the cover down and dropping the arm back on. A bit of pressure, but you definitely don't want to force it. Once that's done, the next step is the RAM or the memory. Nice catch. Now this is the T-Force Vulkan DDR5. Now Team Group are a bit of a brand to watch. Their Vulkan DDR5 is, to my knowledge, the best value DDR5 on the market right now. And their T-Force Delta, which costs a little bit more and has RGB, is phenomenal value for money too. They're not paying me to say this, they've not sponsored this video, it's just really, really fantastic. And as far as price to performance goes, it doesn't get much better. Now, this kit here is the grey kit, that you can get it in a quite striking red. That might actually work with a few of the colours in this build, but too late now, I've ordered the grey one. You can see it is quite low profile, nice and slim. Good if you've got a big bulky air cooler. We don't, but you know, nice to have. 6,000 megahertz and low latency. That latency is really important with DDR5. You want to be in the region of CL30, 32, max 34 or 36, but the lower the better as far as gaming performance goes. All good and well having the speed, but if your latency is not very good, it's a bad situation to be in. For this build, I'm going to be using the second and fourth DIMM slots. Why? Because that's basically what every motherboard is when it comes to dual channel memory. Technically, the first slot is 0, so it slots 1 and 3. Pull the clips back on either side of the RAM DIMMs, and then go ahead and slide the memory in. The T-Force logo should face outwards, away from the motherboard and away from the CPU. Bit of pressure on both sides, and it's going to click in without too many problems. Repeat this for as many DIMMs as you've got, and you can see there is also room for future upgrades, so you can add in another 32 gig kit, an identical set for 64 gigs of memory. We don't want to do that though, as we want max speed, best performance, and of course that dual channel memory capability. Continuing with the theme of great catches, this is a great catch. It's the MP44L, again, from Team Group. I don't know what to say. Price to performance, this stuff kills it. The only thing I think that comes a second best with the MP44L is the crucial P3+. Now, in our review and our testing on the website, check it out, description, cards, don't know which side it is, one of the sides. Performance is great. Price to performance metrics, you're looking $60 to $70 maximum for the 1 terabyte. 2 terabyte is a shade over 100. Having a fast SSD right now is so important. A, because it speeds up the system, makes the whole thing a bit more snappy. B, it helps to minimize or reduce any storage inflicted bottlenecks. And in a build like this, where the CPU and motherboard is super upgradable, it means you haven't got to waste money buying another SSD if you want a more powerful GPU at a later date. Unscrew both the screws on the M.2 heat spreader, slide the drive into place, and resume this back to the position you found it. This will also help to keep the NVMe drive nice and cool, and gives a slightly cleaner aesthetic in the build overall. All that remains then, as far as the motherboard assembly goes, is the cooler. And again, this is another amazing value option for a build like this. It's the Vetru V5. Now, when it comes to CPU cooling, technically, you could stick with the stock cooler on the 7600. And if you're looking to maximize every price to performance metric to the letter, don't buy this. However, if you want a build that isn't going to be loud, a CPU that isn't going to run hot, and just better airflow, better quality of life, $25, buy this, you can't go wrong. I'll leave it linked down below for Amazon and Newegg for latest pricing and availability. Now, this is a really nice cooler. There's some really good budget options out there right now. Johnsbro have got some. I know Deepcool was pretty popular in this regard before. And you can see it's basic. It's a black tower cooler. There really isn't much more to it than that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and secure all the mounting hardware I need to these 4 silver threads on the bottom as per the manual. And I'm going to set the fan aside for later. I don't need to install this right now as it's just going to get in the way. Once these are in, I'm then going to remove these 2 plastic plastic brackets from both the top and bottom of the CPU. The backplate that comes pre-installed is going to remain, and that's what the actual cooler is going to secure into. A drop of thermal paste, and then just torque each of these screws tight one by one. And with that, the motherboard assembly is all sorted, and the next step is getting the case involved. Now for this, I've gone for something just a little bit different. I've gone for an MSI chassis, and specifically this is their Forge 320R Airflow. Now I've looked at a few MSI cases recently on the higher end from their Pano range and actually been genuinely very impressed. This though is about as budget as it gets. You can find this here in the UK for around, I think, like 50 or 60 pounds. Similar over in the US. As I say, latest prices will be at the links in the description below. And I'm quite excited to actually get hands-on with this thing and see what this chassis is really all about. So, nice soft cell foam, that's a good start. None of that horrible polystyrene. And all things considered, that's quite a nice looking case. So at the front here, plenty of mesh, little MSI logo to break things up a little bit. Gonna guess this panel, yep, comes off in one piece. Behind that is 3 included 120mm ARGB fans. Pretty good start. The top I/O is audio, LED power, and a couple of USBs. No Type-C, bit of a shame, but we have it on the rear panel. Tempered glass, gonna remove that. That's gonna give us a good look at the inside of the case. And of course, help for the actual build. That reveals another 120mm ARGB in the rear. The PCI lanes look like these single-use snap-out ones, which is a little bit of a shame, but it's a budget case. I can kind of let it slide. Power supply shield, lots of nice sort of grommets. This is cool. A right-angled USB 3 header, like to see that. And then, if I pull the rear panel off as well, we've got an integrated RGB hub that also has 2 spare ports. That's nice. Going to be great for the cooler. And all the existing fans have pass-through connectors on too, so you could feasibly plug in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ARGB devices out the box to the included hub controller, which is good. The only thing MSI I am going to criticize here is that this cable management is a bit crap. I understand it's a budget case, there's less room, but certainly we could definitely tidy these cables up, and I will indeed do that to get them a bit more out of sight. Especially with this mesh here, we don't want to be seeing the cables through the side of the case. It's just very, very messy and isn't going to lead to a particularly clean build. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put the motherboard into the case, and to do this you will have to venture into the motherboard box and find the included rear I/O shield, and the Wi-Fi antennas. Will save those for later. Now having an I/O shield feels like a little bit of a blast to the past. This is going to click in with the audio ports, these ones here at the bottom, and our display and BIOS flashback buttons at the top. Good that you get BIOS flashback on this board at this price. It's a nice and impressive feature to have, and one that's particularly useful if, as I say, you're going to upgrade this build later on with a higher power CPU. Yeah, we just slide that into place. Make sure you dodge all the cables. Be careful because the corners can be sharp, and it just friction fits in. So it just pops in. There we go. There we are. That's a nice noise. That's a good noise in the world of I/O shields. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Inside the drive bay at the rear, you'll also find a bunch of included accessories. So by the looks of things, to answer my complaint about PCI lanes, there is a spare one, so if you accidentally snap out the wrong one, you have got one you can replace it with. There's also an included fan splitter. That's quite a nice touch. And, oh, a second PCI lane. Okay, MSI, this is getting a bit better. And cable ties, and more importantly, all the screws and standoffs that we need for this build. In order to figure out if we need these, I need to look at where the standoff locations are. So you can see there's 2 at the top here, great. 2 down the middle, pre-plugged in, and 2 at the bottom. However, on the right-hand side of the board, we don't have a standoff here. We don't have one down here, and we also don't have one here at the bottom. We need these standoffs to be installed in order for these screws on the edge of the motherboard on the right-hand side to have something they can actually fasten into. Once the standoffs are correct and the I/O shield's in, it's then a simple case of just sliding the motherboard into place. Again, watch out for any nasty cables that might get in your way, and just try and get it secured onto the standoffs. I'm pretty confident that that's all in okay, and it's just a case of securing down through the standoff holes with the 6 included screws in the accessory bag you get with the case. 3 along the top, 3 along the middle, and 3 down the bottom. At this stage of the build, I could go ahead and put the graphics card in, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to do the power supply first. Now, the reason for this is that getting power cables in now, with as little in the case as possible, is going to be a bit more simple. Now, this is only a 650 watt unit, and those of you particularly eagle-eyed will notice that the 7800 XT has a recommended PSU of 700 watts. However, we've got a low power CPU, the whole build is fairly power efficient, and the 650 is going to be sufficient. This is the MSI MAG A650BN, and I paid about £50 for this in the UK, equivalent to around $60, $65. Now, it's not modular, and it's a very, very basic unit in many respects. However, it has all the things that we need. And while the lack of a PCI Gen 5 power cable will disappoint those of you looking to build an NVIDIA system, put simply, it's not a problem for us today with the AMD build. Similarly, the lack of good cable management via a semi or fully modular interface isn't really a problem. There's loads of room at the bottom where we can stuff and manage the extra cables and tidy them away. Very simple case of sliding the power supply in, fan down here to pull in fresh air from under the case, so just don't put it on a thick rug or thick carpet, and screw the unit in with 4 screws at the back. It's then a simple case of plugging in the motherboard to the right hand side and CPU power to the top left. And I was then going to say, easily plug in the very clever right angled USB 3 cable to the USB 3 header on the motherboard, but it doesn't fit. At least I don't seem to be able to get it to fit without bending the board back. Now I said earlier this was clever. I'm not so sure anymore. I really don't want to mash the header on the board. In fact, I've already mashed the header on the board. I'm not really sure what to suggest there. I'm going to carry on with the other cables, the front panel HD audio to the bottom left, JFP1 to the right hand side, as well as plug in the SATA power cable for the RGB control hub on the case. It may be that I need to just buy a USB 3 extension cable for the internal header, but MSI, that's a disappointing one in the sense that that's an MSI board and an MSI case. So yeah, bit of a shame really that, to be honest. To wrap things up, I'm also going to add the fan back onto our Vetru V5, which can be a little bit more tricky than it should be. Exactly. It's in theory quite a simple process, but I always find it a little bit of a challenge. Maybe the top one going on now will be a bit easier. Aha, there we go. And all that remains then is to put the GPU in. Now, I was originally worried about clearance. This is a big card, but looking at the case, there's no problems. Now, in terms of the PCI lanes, it's a case of checking which ones need removing. And I think in this build, oddly enough, yes, it's the 2nd and the 4th. So to do this, it's quite simple. Just loosen, I was going to say thumb screw at the rear, but it's so tight, I'm going to need a screwdriver. Pull that back, and then with your PCI lanes, go ahead and locate the 3rd and 4th. Basically, push the clip in a bit so it bends. Do that for the 2nd one as well. And then once you've got them bent, you want to just wiggle them. So left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, and it pops off. Same with this one. There we go. They're pretty easy to remove. The problem becomes, obviously, if you ever want to put them back in, you can't. And that's where the reusable ones in the accessory box come into play. Not a major issue, but it's a cost saver. Then, make sure the PCI clip is pushed back on the motherboard. Slide the graphics card into place. Oh yeah. Bit of pressure. Look at that. Definitely want to get that screwed in fairly promptly. I can feel the sag already. Definitely want to get that secured. Hold the GPU up while you do this so it installs nice and straight. And just repeat that for both of the screw hole locations. There we are. Lovely stuff. Put the rear sort of cover plate back on. Nice and easy. And then it's just power to the GPU power connectors on the side of the graphics card. Now, it looks like PowerColor include a sort of GPU support bracket. I want to say this is like a kit of some description. So if I screw the base plate on and then screw this sort of GPU brace piece on as well, tighten that down the bottom for now, I should be able to simply slide this up, tighten it into place. It looks not the best looking thing in the world, the actual support, but it's okay. That is going to be a little bit better. There's still cable management work to do, so bear with me, but I think we might be able to power this thing on and at least make sure the fans and all the RGB is working as intended. So hit the power button. That's looking pretty good. No fans are spinning yet. Although that looks to be because I've actually missed one of the fan headers out. So if I pop that in, you can see all the fans are going to start spinning. That has made the cable management situation worse. I will sort that out. And the LED at the top is going to cycle through all the different modes. So you can see there we've got the rainbow puke. We've got a slightly less aggressive rainbow puke. Green, purple, white, blue, light blue, green, yellow, red. I think the red absolutely works. And of course that matches with the red light bar on the GPU too. I like that the integrated controller lets us plug the cooler in. That's a nice little cohesion touch as well. I'm going to sort some cable management out on this system though, because it's, well, a bit of a mess really. And I'll rejoin you in a moment for some gaming benchmarks and the montage. Don't forget the montage. Moving through into performance, and it's time for the important bit. What are the kind of frame rates you can expect to achieve from a build like this? Well, first up, we tested out Call of Duty Warzone. Why? It's a really popular title. It's not as easy to run as a Fortnite or an Apex, so we will come on to those in a moment. Here at 1440p high with FSR enabled and set to quality. Of course, no frame gen, as that's going to introduce loads of latency, which we don't want, and the build achieved a really solid 180 FPS on average. Move through into Call of Duty's Modern Warfare 3, very similar game in terms of the actual back end and how it's built. So at 1440p high, FSR again on the quality preset, you perhaps won't be surprised to see a similar frame rate, 188 to be precise, while moving through into Starfield switches things up a bit. Now this is a really hard game to run. It's one where loads of people have downloaded DLSS type mods to try and increase performance, but the 7800 XT actually really surprised me. At 1440p high, it achieved a very respectable 98 frames per second, which means you can sit and watch all of those lovely loading screens in, well, great smooth frame rates. Hogwarts Legacy is next. That was so unnecessary. 1440p high, and the build again did well, over 100 FPS, 107 to be precise, more than enough for an RPG game like this one, while Fortnite at 1080p competitive also stacked up well, 300 FPS in this title. That's with everything tuned down to low, except the render distance, which was set to far. Moving back up to 1440p in Apex, again an easier game to run, so the frame rate is going to be higher, 220 frames per second to be precise, which I was really quite pleased with. Finally, to wrap things up, also tested out a little bit of Cyberpunk, 1440p high once again, where the 7800 XT really feels at home, and the build actually performed really well, 104 FPS on average. Great to break through that triple-digit FPS barrier, and while of course this was with ray tracing disabled, an area the 7800 XT struggles, I think these are the settings most of you guys are going to be using. What do you guys think of the performance of this build and the build in general? Really enjoyed putting this one together, and for the price, I think you don't get much more performance than this. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to get subscribed. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.